for week 5 of our HST109 class. We are getting really close to the end of the class, so just keep that in mind. If you're feeling stressed out or tired of the course, or there's only a couple weeks left, which is always good news. So I just want to talk to you guys briefly after looking over your discussion board posts for this week about a few things we're talking about, a lot of Jefferson, a lot of the early Republican Party, the Democratic Republicans as they call themselves. And since a lot of you did your posts on how the conflicts between the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republicans, and of course with Jefferson's election in 1800, we have the first transfer of power between political parties. And this is seen as a big deal because nothing goes terribly wrong, which everybody is very, very relieved to hear at this point. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about was how Jefferson and the rest of the early Republican Party sees themselves very clearly as a champion of what? You guys talked a lot about this. Small farmers. Jefferson is very pro the small farmer who is making his living off the land, just in Jefferson's mind, earning an honest living. This is really ironic considering, Jefferson is a farmer, but again, he's also primarily a politician, so this really isn't what he's doing with his life. But he does see sort of the strength of America being tied to land ownership and being able to live off your own land, this sort of specific idea of independence. So, good for Jefferson to keep in mind is that that's not always how it ended up working in his presidency. So, I wanted to talk to you guys about this conflict and how even though Jefferson and the rest of the Democratic Republicans that come after him see themselves very much as interested in keeping the size of the federal government small. That's why they obviously clashed so much with the Federalists. That they often, while they were in office, took specific action that did increase the power of the federal government. Jefferson's most obvious example of this, of course, is his decision to complete the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the United States at the time. But again, you guys, as you guys read for this week, Jefferson struggled a little bit with this allegedly because, of course, it's not written in the Constitution that the president has this power. And Jefferson wants to adhere quite strictly to the power specifically laid out to him in the Constitution, and he's a little wary of going beyond that because, of course, that's not what the party is supposed to be based upon. But the Louisiana Purchase is a huge expansion of government power, the power to acquire land. It's a very big addition to the presidency at this point. It's tied to a whole bunch of other things. We're going to talk about how the federal government, once you have more land, the federal government actually becomes much more important because then you need to figure out how to turn that land into territories and turn those territories into states eventually, and we'll get to that in the next couple weeks. So the Louisiana Purchase, very big. The second thing that Jefferson does is associated with expanding the power of the federal government at this time is his Embargo Act of 1807. This is Jefferson stepping in. He issues this saying no American ships are to leave their ports until both Britain and France repeal the restrictions they had put against American trade and commerce at this point. So that again is a big thing that the president is stepping in and saying to all the ships in the United States that no, you cannot leave, you cannot do any business with France or England at this point. So that's the second big thing that he does. And then also, a little less considered but also very important, is his promotion and signing of the Slave Embargo Act of 1807, which is the ending of the international slave trade. So again, those are three important items to keep in mind that Jefferson does, that he needs the power of the federal government to complete. And if that had not been acceptable to him, he would have faced a lot more opposition if, the majority of other politicians and voters at this time had thought that those were too far for the federal government at this time. Another thing, moving forward, he also promotes and signs the 12th Amendment, which you guys, I think, might not know about because the textbook doesn't really go into it. But the 12th Amendment changes the process for electing the president. As written in the Constitution, basically each state would pass 2 votes both for president. So you're writing 2 names on the presidential ballot. The one who gets the most vote becomes the president. The one who gets the second most votes becomes the vice president. And of course, we see this causing problems in Jefferson's presidency, and it becomes it becomes an issue where Jefferson and the other politicians at the time start realizing now that political parties were clearly coming into play and didn't look like they were going to go away anytime soon. They did not. So Jefferson steps in and says, okay, we're going to have separate elections for presidents and vice presidents, and they both need to be of the same party, essentially. So that's what the 12th Amendment does. Jefferson encourages its being written in Congress, and he, of course, because he does that, signs it when it was passed in both the House and the Senate. So that's how we get the current situation of how we elect the president today, which again is different than how it is done in the Constitution, which in and of itself is, of course, significant for the Republicans because they adhere ideally to the strict interpretation of the Constitution, but not when you repeal it, not when you amend it. So, so post-War of 1812, a lot of you guys also talked about this too. What happens after the War of 1812 is that a lot of veterans end up getting for compensation for their time in the military as 160 acres. This is a policy that gets implemented not consistently because everything is still a little haphazard after the war, but a lot of veterans do get that 160 acres that they're encouraged to use to sort of begin their new life and, again, promote this farming ideal that Jefferson has in mind here. So that is the government, again, taking in a step and allocating this land to the veterans, not something that they're specifically mandated to do, by the Constitution. But most importantly, along with this giving of land, is that, of course, it's new land acquired from the Louisiana Purchase largely. So these acres given to the veterans are used to develop that area in a way that hadn't been done before. Once the country starts getting bigger, we have this issue of transportation and connection. And the issue of infrastructure becomes very important to the Republican Party. Not so much in Jefferson's time, but as we move onward, Republicans worry a lot about this question of infrastructure. They know that roads, steamships, and eventually canals are very important, and at the state level, they're very in demand once the new land acquired by the Louisiana Purchase gets to be settled more. The states want more guidance on how to stay connected to the rest of the country, basically. So the federal government, again, has this issue where they're like, well, the Constitution doesn't say specifically that we can build roads. So this question becomes, well, can we anyway? And also, equally importantly, who is supposed to pay for these roads, these canals, which of course are not cheap at the time. So there's still a lot of tension between the state and federal governments. It is eventually decided, for the most part, right, that the federal government can step in when this transportation is crossing state lines. But that, again, at this point is not particularly clear. So there's a lot of debate, again, over is the federal government overreaching itself by mandating this construction of roads and canals and that sort of transportation issues. So this all happens under the Democratic Republicans, who for a while really don't have any political opposition at the national level, which you guys will notice in the next unit, in Unit 6. At this point, politics was a lot different, whereas today we have this concern where it's a lot more likely that constituents will participate in politics at the national level. Most people, right, of course, vote in the presidential elections, and less down the line as you move down to the local government. Most people do not have any involvement with their local government at all, and the national federal government those elections get a lot more of the attention. Back in the day, back in the early 1800s, this was the literal exact opposite. People were often cared much more about their local politics than they did about whatever was going on in Washington at the time. So, few people were actually voting in the presidential election during this time period of the Democratic Republicans. There are five, I believe, Democratic Republican presidents. We have Jefferson, we have Madison, Monroe, and Quincy Adams. So I guess that's four. And they all have quite long tenures. A lot of them get elected to 2 terms. They all do, besides Quincy Adams, who is unfortunately really not that popular. He's one of our more unfortunate presidents. But so they do initially run with very little opposition. Once we get to Quincy Adams into the 1820s, keep in mind this for the next upcoming week, is that the 1820s is significant because a lot of states changed their laws regarding property qualifications for voting, which varied from state to state, but normally you had to own X amount of land in order to be able to vote in any capacity. So most people didn't really fit that requirement, so there are very few people before the 1820s voting in the presidential elections. So that's going to change in the 1820s coming this week. So the Democratic Republicans they faced this new little crisis in the early 1820s by saying, well, some of the Democratic Republicans think that they've already overstepped their bounds. They think that they've gone way too far in terms of allowing the federal government to do things that the Constitution doesn't say specifically that they're allowed to do, and they see this as a real danger to the future of the party. Other Democratic Republicans, which become the more successful ones, particularly Martin Van Buren and Andrew Jackson, want to use this increased suffrage, more people voting, to the party's advantage. And they want to use this to lead the party in a new direction that would continue to allow it to use the power of the federal government in new and different ways that hadn't necessarily been thought of before. So the presidencies of Van Buren and then eventually Jackson, as we'll get into, are very important for this change, this fluctuation in how it's decided what the federal government should be doing, essentially. So that's what I want to just keep that guys in mind, that, you know, Jefferson and his party and the Democratic Republicans are largely associated with small government, small farmers. But in reality, this time period is very important for expanding and defining the office of the presidency. And this is going to continue particularly into Jackson, who Jackson's opponents by the end of his first term are calling him King Andrew because they are trying to liken him to a monarch for all the power that they believe that he has as president. So these next few presidents are very important for understanding how we understand the office in historical context. So just keep that in mind. And also to keep on your radar, the final is actually coming up very soon, considering I know it feels like we did just take the midterm. But just as a reminder, your final will open at midnight on the 21st of April, which is a Saturday. And it'll be open for a little longer than a week. It will be open until the end of the day, the 29th, which I believe is a Monday. That's just because that's when final grades are due by the end of that week for our B session class. So I need to make sure that everybody is done before then. And I will early this week be posting, there will be a study guide for you guys early, probably Monday or Tuesday for this week, letting you guys know what to study, what to expect. The format will be the same as the midterm, right? 25 multiple choice questions and an essay question. So no surprises there. As always, email me if you have any questions coming up as we wrap up the course, and I'll see you guys next week.